what is it? Digital asset company. And so is Rick. No, sorry, I apologize. We have Chet and we have Kevin working from Digital Asset Company. They're working on hydro builds, and we'll let them speak first. But we also have Taylor Monig from CleanSpark, who is working on immersion builds, and we also have Rick Margerson from the Rossio Group, who's also working on immersion builds. So what I want to do is I want to start with Kevin and Dean, because they're kind of working together. We want to just kind of hear the story of what Digital Asset Company does, what you guys have been building, and what the process is like going from a green field to a 1 megawatt immersion site. What are the costs associated with that, and what are some of the considerations that need to be taken when building out a hydro site? Now, it could be, you know, the larger that you go, the more considerations that need to be taken into account. But a lot of our people are starting on the smaller end. So let's kind of keep that in mind when we're talking about considerations that need to be taken into account. I'll let you guys go at it. Kevin, Chet, you just figure out what you guys who wants to start? You're muted, Kevin.
Can people hear me now, or is it still reverb?
You're good.
Okay. So my name is Kevin Dean, and I run a 6 megawatt site with Chet down in Kentucky. I started off this as a single 1 megawatt project that I wanted to do. And somehow I ended up with a 6 megawatt site, and we've got about a little over 1,000 machines running right now. We've been running for maybe 18 to 20 months, and we've got the pain and the scars to prove it. I guess I'm anxious to see what's happened in the last couple of years. We made this purchasing decision a couple of years ago based on what I believe to be an easier configuration and set up operationally, with some obvious advantages. I believe that the uptime is 99% if you run these things right. And I believe that the maintenance is less, but it's a different skill set than maintaining a machine at a time, like Austin does, and all the other traditional kinds of things do. You have a whole different mechanical system to maintain. So anyways, we spent about 4 months to build the site. From a cost perspective, if you're really interested in costs, the things that are different and can be expensive is a chemical treatment system / water treatment system. If you look at it like a giant swimming pool for these cooling systems, you have to keep the things out, like the algae, from growing, and you have to monitor your pH levels, which is the hardness of your water, just like you do a swimming pool. You have to keep them within a certain amount of range, and there's a series of we put in an automated dosing system that takes a sample of the water and says, is it the right hardness, and automatically adds the appropriate mix to keep the hardness from fouling up, essentially, the cooling tubes that run through the cooling tower. I believe that one of the biggest mistakes that people will make or have made historically, and there's examples of this, is deploying it without any kind of chemical treatment system or poor water quality. There's an example in Texas that Poulin built a few years ago, and it was just a colossal failure, but mainly because you didn't have the appropriate utilities, water and systems in place. And so, Mike, I guess I would say that, we are on city water and sewer, and we are on grid power here in Kentucky. If you want to know how much water these things use, they use each container uses about 350 gallons an hour. That's for each 1 megawatt that you use. So you're going to use, call it 8,000 gallons of fresh, clean water a day if you're using a wet dry system like we are.
Now, is that water recycled, or is that new water coming in?
That's new water coming in. There really is not much water recycling. because it's all evaporated. It evaporates into the air, right? So you're basically injecting water into the 130-degree pipe or fluid coming out, and it just evaporates into the air. And so very little of it is recycled.
Okay.
But if you to put that into perspective, the cost to run a container for the month of power is about $1,500 for water. So it's not overly expensive for the water where we're at. I think
Did
most
you
people
say 1,500 per month?
per megawatt, yeah, per megawatt per month.
Per megawatt per month. Okay.
So I mean, I'm call it, I'm just generalizing here, but call it $6,000 for 4 containers running, $6 to $7,000. And that's every water, every location is going to have their individual water schedule, but I don't think you'll find water as your primary pain point when you're doing hydro.
What is your primary pain point when you're doing hydro?
Well, hydro primary pain point is your CapEx up front, these treatment systems. So you figure I probably spent $10,000, probably $5,000 per megawatt for a chemical treatment and dosing system is your CapEx that you wouldn't see in potentially other areas.
Okay.
Now I did it.
Is that something that the manufacturer had prepared you for and kind of warned you about in the specs and when you were considering this whole project, or?
No, I mean, I kind of got led down the path, that says basically if you order this container, all you really have to do is plug it into a hose and you're going to be good. And I'm thinking, wow, it's going to be a lot quieter than the air model, and the cooling effect's got to be better. So when we got it here, I did not know anything about the chemical system, and I was told that really by my plumbing contractor that had helping us, that they maintain these cooling towers, and you're going to have this, or you're going to, in 30 or 60 days, all of your cooling tubes are going to be fouled up with, elements that need to drop to the bottom or get removed. And so you're going to be, if you don't put this in a month or two, you're going to have trouble with removing all the heat from your system, depending on, how bad your water is. So that was totally unprepared. Now, since we made our decision 2 years ago, they've since come out with a dry cooler option and a couple of different options. And there's some things that are coming out and are available and are developing now. We have found multiple problems with the containers themselves, the hydro containers, and pump redundancy and things like that. So I would say the biggest negative I have seen with these containers as a hydro is that when you lose a container, or put a circulating pump in the hydro container, you lose 210 miners hashing until you get that fixed, as opposed to something small that might take down a miner or a group of miners or 10 miners. And so, we had a problem where we had a poor pump and needed to wait 2 months for a replacement pump, only to get a replacement pump and have it fail within 2 weeks.
Okay, so that redundancy definitely is important then, and maybe wasn't a consideration in the original design of the container.
Correct. So you have a couple of container companies coming on now that we've kind of been talking to over the last couple of years, saying what are the weaknesses, what are the pain points that are addressing some of those issues with a redundant set of pumps. I would say another big weakness of the existing HK3 technology is the ability to remote access the user interface inside the container from a different location. So if in the event of a power loss, we actually had to get someone physically to the site to, hit restart and clear out some of the errors on the user screen and most of that should be able to be done remotely, but there is no remote access user interface currently into the ant spaces that would allow that to happen. So for instance, Chet can manage a curtailment down and up, but it can't manage a power failure from remotely, when it might have just been a simple, 2-minute power failure, 5-minute power failure, and then you've got to get someone physically to the mine. So that would be something I would hope would be addressed over the next couple of years, but it's been a weakness for us.
Okay. So one thing I want to let our listeners, hear is what are the costs associated with going from greenfield to a 1 megawatt hydro site?
Okay. Well,
Total cost.
I think you can go up to a couple of things. I would say one of the unknowns is going to be a function of it. Are there specific utility charges that you have to incur, or that you will incur, to bring that 1 megawatt site live? I was told initially that was going to cost me $70,000 from the utility to bring the service to the site, to the green field, if you will. But when all is said and done, our utility at the mine has been excellent, and they were able to they brought all of the power to our site without any charges. So that's an unknown, but it could be anywhere. I was told initially it was going to be about 70 grand. So it ended up being zero, but I've heard as much as 250 grand, depending on the utility and depending on how far away you are from, how long it takes them to get your service to you. That's really just a site specific question. So I would say you're going to spend 200 grand minimum per megawatt to get a hydro site up and running. Maybe you get it done for 150, but that would depend on if you're doing, if you're doing a single megawatt, like a smaller setup, you're not going to get the economies of scales with transformer purchase and a lot of these other kinds of things that you can to get your costs down. But I wouldn't budget anything less than a couple $100 grand to get things running.
Understood. What do you think, like, the hydro side of things how has that benefited you versus maybe doing an immersion build? Like, do you see it as being a large cost benefit or like a large efficiency gain? What is it exactly that's, making you continue doing hydro versus maybe dipping into some other type of builds?
I'm actually anxious to hear what's been going on the last couple of years in immersion, because when I made this decision, it was 2 years ago. And at that point, when I had equipment on the high seas coming this direction, and I haven't turned back. But for me, I made that decision based on a couple of factors. That at the time there was some question about warranties and whether they would be voided or not with immersion, and I kind of didn't want to get into that sandbox. I was considering deploying in a gas field in Texas, and as well. And my thoughts were that a closed system versus an open system was going to be better with respect to keeping things clean and running. Familiarity with the mechanicals and how this working was a big option. It was a big deal for me. The way these systems work, the containers themselves that house the miners, is very similar to a water jacket of a car. And so, you've got this fluid circulating, you've got these fans, and you've got these big pumps and water pumps. So for me, it was a familiarity with how the innards worked, whereas I was less familiar with, the immersion side of things and fluid dynamics, those kinds of things. But I believed it could be less maintenance, cleaner, new technology. I was looking to think that, as I look to the future, I'm assuming that there might be different fluids, there might be different speed with which we move the fluids out and circulate within these containers. So those are a couple of reasons why I went hydro versus immersion. But some of those things may have changed now with other developments in immersion.
Yeah, I definitely want to hear from Taylor. based on, you know, your responses, based on what you've said, what are the things, Taylor, that you're seeing in immersion builds that are benefiting you over other kinds of builds like air or hydro? I know a lot of people are choosing to do the immersion builds, especially heat reuse guys. And I don't know how heat reuse plays into hydro especially, but Taylor, you're building some pretty large sites over there. So what is your experience like, and what are some things that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, if I just want to give a couple of comparisons and to Kevin's setup, right? So we utilize single phase immersion. So I guess just to clarify that too, there's a couple different types of immersion, right? You've got open bath, single phase, and two phase. Single phase is like an oil-based system where the fluid is pumped a lot, like Kevin was explaining, like a car radiator. And that's actually where I came from, is I grew up in the race car industry. So that's why I'm very comfortable with fluids rather than cooling with air. Two-phase fluids are like an engineered fluid by 3M. Novec 7100 is a really common one a lot of people have heard about. But our company, CleanSpark, has really been focused on single-phase immersion. And when comparison with Kevin, right? So we don't use water at all. We use a completely oil-based system, so it's a single loop. We're also continuing to develop containerized solutions of the single-phase immersion in order to keep all the pipe sizing down and everything like that, so we can utilize a lot less oil to help keep costs down. And when you're not using water, it also opens up some deployment options, right? Because I don't need to be connected to any type of water source. I'm also not using any water, so a lot of the utilities and cities in which we operate view that as a net benefit, right? Both Rick and I, who will hop in here in a minute, both come from the regular data center industry world where using water is a really big negative, right? And so we try to incorporate a lot of that technology over here at CleanSpark. The Rosso-based system is also completely oil. And when you do that, you eliminate the water treatment. So megawatt per megawatt, we're not purchasing any sort of water treatment. And it also eliminates all the maintenance that would have gone with that water treatment, right? And on top of that, all the water quality issues, scaling of coils, all of that is pretty much gone, right? There is some benefits in pumping water versus oil. I'd call them, you know, very minute. We're talking 0.00, 5%. Like it's almost apples and oranges when you talk about that, right? But the big thing for me, and that really drew me to immersion, is really the flexibility in open bath immersion, right? So if you talk about Kevin's Antbox container, right, it's going to be absolutely fantastic for that X19, XP, or Hydro, whatever's in there, right? But when you look at the next generation of miner, if it goes up 2,000 watts or substantially changes its form factor, it's going to be really hard for Kevin to remap that container in a cost-effective way in order to insert those new devices, right? If you have an open bath of single phase immersion, you know, when Rick and I used to work at TMG Core, we had a big test tank we all kind of shared. I'd be playing with a 200 terahash S19 Pro. He'd be working on a 250 terahash What's miner, and we'd have a couple guys in the lab working on a set of Canons, right? All in the same tank, all being properly cooled. It gives you a lot of flexibility on deployment, right? If you have a properly designed tank, the same tank that was designed for your S9 could very well still be running your S21. Obviously, there's some nuances there and things that you have to look at, but there's just a lot of flexibility with single phase immersion. And then the PUE is also extremely low. Really, the only thing that can beat it is obviously two-phase cooling, but there's a lot of drawbacks to two-phase cooling with the cost of fluid, the safety of the fluid, and all those types of things. And that hurts my heart to say, because Rick and I spent probably 5-6 years working on two-phase immersion. I've probably spent more money than anybody in the world dealing with it. So definitely hurts my heart to say, but we're learned our lesson there and have focused on this single-phase immersion stuff. So yeah, over the last, call it 2 years, we've built 250 megawatts of infrastructure, I think, a lot of which is air. So I can definitely fight on the air side. Scott, if you want somebody to play the third part of the triangle for today's exercise, we've got a pretty clever building that has a basically zero PUE and has 100%, generally about 100% uptime up to 95F. So
Yeah,
definitely
absolutely. We want to hear about it all, you know, air, immersion, and hydro. So, but yeah, Trevor, what do we want to do next here?
Well, I mean, honestly, we're hearing a lot about like the different challenges that come with the builds, but I think that our listeners really would benefit from hearing like how to go about deploying these things. So maybe Rick, maybe you can talk about deployment. You know, what kind of sites you're looking for, the type of like for an immersion build. What is the overall like climate that you're looking for? Can you run in all climates? What's the build process kind of look like for you?
I got to say, the stuff that we have been talking to people about over the last, we've only come out of stealth mode very recently, and so we talked to people from Antarctica all the way to West Texas and Florida, which and Paraguay and a number of other places, which really dramatically changes the way we do things. And so, as an example, what we do at Rosso, I don't want to push Rosso too hard here, but what we do at Rosso, what we end up doing is we say we have this solution, and this is part A of that solution. But our professional services, what we do, we have to take and ascertain, what your goal is, what your uptime is going to be, what your maximum temperature is going to be throughout the year, what the humidity, the temperatures. Are you a candidate for total dry cooling, like what Taylor does with running a dielectric fluid through a dry cooler? Or are you a candidate that says, hey man, I'm running J Pros, and when I run a J Pro at 36-degree inlet temperatures, my 32 watt per terahash drops all the way down to 40, 42, 43 watt per terahash, and therefore that water consumption of $1,500 per megawatt really just gets thrown out the window, unless I start really picking that apart. And so it's an open-ended answer, and I apologize for that, but it really depends on the condition of where you're living. Now, if you're just running smaller type of configurations, do the best that you can do, and that's ultimately what you can do. Having a swamp cooler where you're running that dielectric fluid, and you're passing that dielectric fluid just like Taylor does over at CleanSpark, and popping it in front of a swamp cooler is going to drop your air ambient temperatures down to dew point, which is really going to greatly enhance what you can do for your watt per terahash. People spend millions and millions of dollars going from 32 to 28 to 21 and to 18 on their setups, and at the end of the day, that's really what matters. Is, can you become more efficient? Can you increase the efficiency of your miner, which ultimately takes less money to create that same Bitcoin and keep you profitable?
On that note, we have a question that specifically was asked by one of our members, playing around with immersion tank builds. What kind of machines are you able to dip in immersion? Are you able to dip the S21s? We've heard a lot of back and forth about whether they can be, whether they can't be, and I'd like to know, is it something that you can dip these machines, or you cannot, or you have to stay with the S19s?
So I'm going to have to take a 10,000 flyby on this. Many people have been dipping the S21s, including myself, as well as other people that have been doing it with some varying success. There are some areas of the S21 that I believe that need work that I won't actually say publicly, just to sustain the ability for the S21 to keep moving forward. But we've had some issues with the S21 where Bitmain and what they're doing has recognized that there are some things that they could do better than what they do today. And so yes, the S21 actually does an incredible job in immersion, quite frankly. Running it at 25 degrees Celsius for an inlet coolant temperature, going all the way to 50 degrees Celsius, we lost less than 1 watt per terahash, which is an incredible feat. The WhatsMiner M66S, the latest and greatest as well, same thing. We lost about 3/4 of a watt per terahash going from 25 all the way to 50 degrees Celsius, and that's unheard of. So all the new stuff, including the S21, has some real durability when it comes to running an immersion. But there is more to doing immersion cooling than just popping it in, taking the fans off, and throwing firmware on it when it comes to some of the new stuff. And there's some compatibility issues, which comes from the dielectric paste that goes between the chip and the radiator that's on there, and everything else that is all being addressed, and everybody knows about it, and there's some good, really, really good stuff coming when it comes to immersion cooling. But without saying too terribly much, maybe Taylor can answer a little more than me.
Taylor's shaking his head. I kind of want to
hear
that.
No. Yeah, so on the Bitmain products, literally every single Bitmain device up until the S21 has been perfect in immersion. If you guys are going to dunk your S21s at home, go buy, I think it's SPG 30B, which is the thermal paste from the J Pro, and repaste your device and put it in, be absolutely perfect. Thermal paste that was used on the S21 is not very compatible at all with any of the modern oils. So
There we go.
yeah, just go ahead and paste it and it'll be fine. So yeah.
Okay, awesome. That's good to know. I see. I hadn't known that you just need to repaste it, but that does make sense. Cool. Well, I kind of want to hear from Chet a little bit. He hasn't really said anything. So, you know, Chet, is there anything that any points that you want to point out about, you know, what you're doing on hydro side of things?
Yeah, and while we wait for Chet to unmute, yeah, what I was wondering specifically is, you know, like Kevin was saying earlier, really, there's maybe less there's more of an inability to just experiment and go from one miner to another, right? With hydro, because the units have to be specifically built for that rack or for that system. But with immersion, for example, you can just take any kind of miner, dunk it, maybe play around with the thermal paste, like Taylor was saying, right? But then yeah, so that whole warranty thing as well is something that I was interested in, right? That's also a consideration. Like, hey, do you want to dunk a miner and go against the manufacturer warranty, right? So these pros and cons of what made you decide to go for this, right? And then, but yeah. So anyway, do we have Chet back yet?
You're muted, Kevin.
Dean will have to unmute or maybe reply. I bet you Chet's probably fixing some kind of broken pump right now, right?
He is. He is. So we've lost Chet for the moment, and I'll speak to his as best I can. But as long as we were on repairs and validity of the repairs, we had a situation when we first went live, where we were sending hydros back for warranty repair. They were gone for 6 or 8 weeks. Charging $100 a miner, sending them back to Texas, and they come back not fixed. And so there was apparently at the repair shop, there was no way to run a hydro and age test it or make sure that it was going to come back fixed properly. So that's when we kind of recruited Austin to do our direct repairs in-house, and we built a tester, and we stopped sending them out for repair, for warranty, because it just wasn't worth the lost downtime. And we just developed that in-house. And so I guess that would be another consideration, as they want you to send back the entire machine rather than a particular control board or allow you to consolidate. So
yeah,
we just basically don't send them back anymore. If that's a consideration for other people that are looking to start or, you know, buy a container full of miners, try and find someone that can repair them quickly, I think it'll be fine. You'll be happier than what you get serviced from Bitmain.
Yeah. So
John D raised his hand. Oh, Scott, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, just then we'll go to John. But Taylor, yeah, I didn't hear or not, but yeah, there was that concern specifically from somebody in Telegram recently that was saying don't dunk the S21s, right? What did you answer that? Like, was there a major people?
It's just the thermal paste. All you got to do is re-thermal paste the boards. I've talked with Bitmain about it. The S21 Pro will have an updated thermal paste, so this won't be a concern for consumers. You know, moving forward, the device wasn't made for immersion cooling, so you know, no harm, no foul there. Using it in an adverse environment from what they designed it for. But on the warranty side, like kind of going back to that, that's another reason why we don't really feel a big risk in avoiding the warranty, Scott, is like things don't break. Like at our immersion site, it's very, very rare. Let me pull it up. I think it's around 4,700 devices, something like that. It's very common for us to go a whole month with not a single device breaking. Things reboot, sure. Right. Things like that, like the devices just don't break. They're in a very stable environment. They're the same temperature. Like they just sit there, right? Rick and I had the facility we designed together. When I was at TMG Core, I came over to CleanSpark. We were doing hosting for CleanSpark. There was 90 days where we didn't even log into the VPN. Like nothing went down. Then you have to look at it. And it's things like that. with our scale of operation, as we continue to grow, we've got over like 130,000 miners online right now. Being able to shrink everything down and make it that easy for operators is great. And on the curtailment side, we have things, Scott, where basically like when we curtail our machines, we put them in sleep mode, we slow the pumps down so the temperature change is like very, very minimal, if not zero. And then when we re-engage the power, turn the miners back on, pumps turn back on, miners stay exactly the same temperature. A lot of people don't realize like one of the biggest benefits of immersion is keeping the same temperature. Chips die because they expand and contract and expand and contract and expand and contract, and that shatters them, right? Over time, we're in immersion, they just sit there at 40°C inlet temperature and just never change. That's almost as good of a benefit as keeping them cooler, right? Like, I don't know, math to math, what would be better, 85°C all the time versus some variance in the 70s, but I would probably bet on 85°C year round. So it's things like that where immersion has a ton of benefits people don't realize at the larger scales.
So yeah, Kevin, from your perspective, and you'll have to unmute, but what about you for like curtailment, or if you have to shut it down, is it like a crazy process where you got to do it slowly and make sure things are still getting cooled in the process? Like if you have a power outage, like how does that all work?
So curtailment is relatively simple. It's a simple scheduling where we can sit them down, put them into sleep mode, and we can schedule that, the duration and time. And so that's I would say curtailment is pretty easy. But I would say that, and so our chip temperatures come way down and during the curtailment. But I would say that what Taylor says is probably pretty accurate, and maybe one of the differences or the negatives between hydro and immersion is that the minute I stop those chips from hashing, I get that drop in temperature probably more quickly than Taylor does in his systems. But every time I come back up from a power outage where I actually lost and went down temperature, I couldn't keep them idling and maintain the temperature, I lose circuit boards and or miners that I have to deal with. So my big issue with hydro is hydro does not like to be turned off at all. It just likes to be going, and you have that stability. And we can echo the performance that Taylor says is that once they're up and running, it's incredibly, incredibly stable. And most of our operations are dealt with, keeping the maintaining the infrastructure rather than dealing with the miners themselves. Unless we have a power outage, and then it's just a shit show.
So I have a question. I heard that there was a publicly traded Bitcoin mining company that was doing immersion, and they dealt with some issue where they lost their entire system, for example, when they had to shut down. Something froze. It got too cold. Is that true, or like does anyone understand what might have happened there?
So yeah, okay. So when you're building immersion, especially in single phase, you can do things all oil based, or you can have a plate heat exchanger. So you can have a dual loop system. So you have oil on one side of your system pumping through the tank. You have water on the other side of your system pumping through the dry cooler. This can be beneficial in climates above 104 F, where the dry coolers kind of typically run out of delta to full heat, right? And you can't really run the miners as hard as you'd like. So a lot of companies will either spray the dry coolers, acrobatic assist, or move to a cooling tower, right? So there's water in the mix. Unfortunately, there was a weather event where the weather went sub-freezing for, let's call it, 4 or 5 days. There was no heat trace or power at the location in which you're speaking, in which the pipes literally froze because there was water in them. So there is some operational complications if you're going to use water in your immersion cooling loop, because you have to think of, hey, if the power goes out and it freezes, what's going to happen to the water in the pipes? A lot like if you just had water in your car radiator. That's why we use antifreeze, right? So we always recommend, or I used to recommend at TMG when I worked there, putting glycol in your system. Putting a little bit of glycol in your system does reduce your heat transfer, though. So there is a trade-off there, right? You're basically giving up a little performance. So a lot of people in Texas chose to go with fully water systems to try and gain that last 5 to 10% of heat transfer. And sometimes that, had a rather detrimental effect on their operations during a freeze. So yeah, there was an event like that. I don't want to highlight the company or anything, but yeah, you got to make sure the pipes don't freeze, but that goes for any application of water in life. So
yeah,
that's
well,
right.
thank you. Yeah.
So I want to second that. We had a freeze this last winter, maybe even the same kind of event that Taylor describes for a significant, maybe 3 or 4 days. And our issue with hydro became one of maintaining loop temperature, because the miners won't restart after they get so cold. I forgot the exact temperature, but you have to maintain. And so we've seen people trying to, put heaters and propane heaters in there to get the whole container up to operating temperature and keep that loop up, and it's just not effective. And so, we tried that as well through several emergencies. But ultimately, what you need to do is maintain the loop temperature, and when you come back up, can be done with firmware. And so what we do is, in a cold environment, we can bring up, a subset of miners, say 20 miners in the container, and we can maintain their temperature and get them back up to get the whole loop up to operating temperature. And that's a little softer way to turn stuff back on. And so that's just a learning curve for us. And that ability wasn't there when we first started. It's only when the firmware came out that allowed us to have a little more direct control over miner and direct to chip temperatures. And so that's one of the advantages, I think, as well.
Oh, okay. So we had people up with their hand up. John had his hand up earlier. I don't know
Scott.
if it's still relevant.
Yeah, I think Taylor answered it too, and I think it's important from Kevin's setup and Taylor's too, right? From a maintenance standpoint, do you feel like operations and OpEx going forward is going to decrease because of the new solutions? Was one thing, but I think you had kind of answered that too. Basically, you're not even touching the system; it's just running itself, which is Rick, you're shaking your head, right? So it's pretty amazing how it runs itself. I think that's important when looking at the future. And these solutions are, I mean, we're talking like 1, 2, 3, 400% scalability compared to what we're dealing with now. And do you guys have any? It's kind of a loaded question, but WhatsMINED products are pretty amazing. What's in the marketplace? Yeah, they might be a little more expensive. Do you guys have any opinion of either unit, albeit performance, or deployability, or what have you, since you've been running these systems for some time now?
This is probably the only thing Rick and I disagree on. He's going to be the big WhatsMINED guy, and I'll be the big Antminer guy. I've had a really good relationship with Antminer since 2016. Learned a lot about their devices, and all I have to say is I think you guys should be really excited for WMS this coming week. I think they're going to announce something pretty amazing that's going to really carry the torch for ASICs moving forward for a little bit. So I'll hand it off to Rick, but we're personally, CleanSpark's exclusively a Bitmain shop right now.
So I'm not going to actually diss Bitmain at all. I think Bitmain's been doing a fantastic job. There's a reason why everybody dunks Bitmain products over WhatsMiner. Absolutely. I've had S9. Somebody said something about set it and forget it type of thing. I know of S9s that I worked on back in 2017 that are still running in Immersion that nobody's even touched them. We just don't bother. We run a single controller, completely underclocked, and we've been doing that for a whole lot of years. And they're about to be turned off, quite frankly. But from a longevity standpoint, even back when I worked with Taylor back at TMG Core when I was the director of special projects, we had a tank full of systems, and we had an incident where somebody accidentally turned off the fan system on the cooling towers, and things started to heat up. What ended up happening was every single one of the J Pros overheated and shut down, and the WhatsMiner M30++ just kept on chugging. So I got to say, as a testament to WhatsMiner, what they can do with their ability to withstand the ability to shut down and just keep on going as I don't want to call them a doorstop, because that's a negative term, but we've pushed the M66 to M56 farther than I think anybody's ever done to date. Running 430 terahash on a single M66S, and then I'm also gonna, at the end of the call here, I'm going to also step out and say, being able to run the M63S running single phase immersion coolant, dielectric fluid, the exact same coolant through that same, Kevin, I know you're listening real closely on this one now, but being able to run that single loop through our pressurized system, and then also placing that M63S inside of an open bath and getting over 500 terahash off of that same machine with some really good watt per terahash. There's room for a whole lot of movement in what single phase immersion cooling can still do. I'm like Taylor, I'm a massive 2-phase immersion cooling guy, always will be, and when the technology catches up, I'm going to jump on board that hardcore. But right now, I'm gonna make sure that single phase can do whatever it can. Direct to chip, open bath, you name it. As the OCP leader for immersion requirements, I'm going to do whatever I can to make the best of everything that I can make. And so, being able to push an M63S, as an example, where we have that fluid running inside that heat sink, and be able to place it in an open bath and being able to push it harder and further than what anybody's ever been able to do. There's another company that has heat pipes inside of their heat sinks that are doing something really crazy and being able to overclock considerably. There's just so much more room that we're going to be able to do in the very near future. And the stuff that we're uncovering and the ability to do that in single phase, it's incredible. Stay tuned, because we're going to break the internet coming up.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we have a question from George, and I'll open that up in a second here. But yeah, that's awesome. I love that you said overclocking, because that seems to be what people really want to do with immersion. They're like, I want to do immersion because I want to overclock the hell out of these things. I don't know if you can necessarily do that with hydro so much, if you can experiment and push them, or if they're just kind of like out of the box and you just plug them in and let them go. But let's open that question up a little bit after, and then we'll just start with George and then maybe get back to that.
No, I think that question goes really into what I was trying to speak on. I wanted to just speak about heat rejection systems in general for both hydro and immersion, and how we're seeing a standardization of sorts, and seeing that you can use this very type for both systems. But now we're seeing that you can actually put together different heat rejection systems to produce different cooling capabilities and different climates as well. Like Tyler was saying, the addition of glycol was a good thing for climate-based mining, just depending on where you're at. And we've also seen that in Texas and other industries, not just in mining, but in the solar, not the solar farms, but the wind farms as well, as they didn't have any glycol or freon, whatever it would be, for heat rejection during certain times. And so those ended up freezing and not being able to be used during freezing weather. So my question would be, are y'all seeing like a marriage of the heat rejection systems, and also maybe an evolution in heat rejection systems as well, HVAC, mechanical, what have you?
I mean, I can start. So we haven't seen, let's call it like a revolution, but we are seeing people kind of starting to pull out the last 1 to 2 to 3% of dry cooler technology, right? Rather than being able to close that edge. We operate a lot in Georgia, obviously, and we just purchased a site in Wyoming, right? So I'm lucky as an operator that the technical requirements for the devices that we're building, right, are typically 100F or less, right? And with it being 100F or less, we have absolutely no problem just using oil coolers. I mean, technically that's what they are. They're not really dry coolers when you're using oil or oil coolers, to maintain a 45°C inlet temperature below 100% of the year. So we're not really having to look into more advanced cooling systems. We're more extracting, like I said, the last marginal gains out of what is the most relative cooling technology now. One thing I will say about the overclocking, as it popped up, right? While liquid to chip, we'll call that hydro, right, can provide a ton of overclocking, right? The heat rejection is absolutely fantastic. It's on par with immersion. You can do all the exact same things. One thing that I don't think a lot of people talk about, right, is unfortunately the only way to be cost effective with hydro right now is to buy it from the provider. And the provider is going to build heat rejection around a certain amount of miners, and they're going to limit your overclocking, not by your ability to deliver firmware and things like that, but your ability to actually deliver electricity and cooling in which to do the overclocking. If I work with Rosto and I build an immersion system, Rick and I can design it to have a ton of overhead in it, and we can actually overclock the machines 20, 35%, right? Whatever it is. And a lot of people forget that if you're using 120% overclocking, what does that also mean? You're using 20% less machines. So actually my immersion deployment with my up-to-date container with my remote controls, oil-based, no water treatment, all these benefits we're getting is actually going to be cheaper than you deploying air because I'm using 20% less machines, and the machines are the most expensive part of the puzzle. So that's one thing that I think should be highlighted for the consumer going out and looking at hydroverse immersion. If you buy a hydro container like Kevin did, you can't overclock it, not because the chips won't do it, not because the miner won't do it, not because the firmware won't do it, but they limited you in cooling and power by designing that container around their devices to protect it. So it's a little bit different way of thinking about working with the miner companies and your third parties, or if you're going to develop a system yourself, some of the benefits you can get by building it yourself or working with a good third party.
It's also notable that the density in single phase immersion cooling has really started to go through the roof. You know, the scaling up on the direct to chip, and I'm going to step up to the plate for Kevin here and say that, you know, they have a great ability to go scale up because they have that 42U rack that goes straight upwards, and that does a lot for the density. But also in single phase, for perspective, for what we do in the Rosso configuration, what we have today for, you know, for call spade a spade, we don't sell a single tank, we sell a single solution, and that solution encompasses a number of different tanks and pumping and aggregation and everything that really helps bring the price per megawatt down. But you know, our 2.8 to 3.0 megawatt solution, when it comes to all of our tanks and everything else, has a 22 by 21 footprint, 21 feet by 22 feet. That is where we have 2.8 megawatts running using the WhatsMiner product. You know, again, stay tuned for the Bitmain show that's coming up, because I think that's going to be an eye opener for a lot of people, and I'm excited to see what Bitmain's bringing to the table on this weekend. And so you know, there's a lot coming on single phase immersion cooling. We have scratched the surface, and as cryptocurrency miners across the world, we really have enabled single phase immersion cooling for the data centers, for the x86, the HPC, the artificial intelligence side. We have been breaking the barriers down. They're only actually starting to realize it today, which is my background, and you know, part of being OCP and everything else. You know, we have really opened their eyes. You know, the cryptocurrency guys that are doing single phase immersion cooling, you guys should be really proud, because we've done something that no one else has been able to do across the world, whether it be direct to chip and the density that we're doing, or open bath. You know, we have led the path for the world. You know, immersion cooling's been around since the late 60s, and it has not been embraced by the x86 side of the world. And now, as of last year, the beginning of this year, you go to the Dell website, the HP website. Now they're talking about immersion cooling, dedicated immersion servers, everything else. Everyone who has embraced immersion cooling when it comes to the cryptocurrency side should be incredibly proud. And I tip my hat to you guys.
Awesome. Well, yeah, we're going to open it up for questions and answers. Oh, and unless, Kevin, did you have any point that you wanted to make on that? You just have to unmute.
I just had one point when Taylor was talking about the huge benefit of the ability to overclock. I think for me, I'm running 2-year-old S19 184 hydros for about a third of my fleet. And for me, it was just the opposite. The ability to underclock and pick up joules per terahash and efficiency is the only thing that's keeping my mind from being unprofitable or profitable post-halving. And so, for instance, I have the spec on a 184 hydro is 195, and we're running we're running 23.2 joules per terahash on our 184s. And so the ability to lower it down kept me profitable versus if I was having to run it spec or having to run with the stock firmware, those same machines would be unprofitable. So for me, it's the opposite, I think. And depending on the situation, now I still have some of that same upside, but I'm, my particular situation, it's really just the opposite of what Taylor, so some of these people that are dealing with post having issues or thin margins, and are making some of those decisions, well, that's what saved this mine from at least short-term profitability.
Yeah, I mean, cooling with liquids, both immersion and the hydro, you'll get better efficiencies at the chip just from the heat rejection. So when we're underclocking, we have similar miners just in different form factors. We can get down to like the J Pros down to 23, 22 joules a terahash underclocking them really low at immersion because they're so cool.
For sure.
The train is so much faster. So there's a lot of benefits from cooling with liquids in general. And my point was just the overhead on the containers won't be enough to do some serious overclocking just the way Bitmain engineers them. But you can definitely underclock them to stay online. For sure.
Yep.
Well, awesome, guys. We're coming up on time here today. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. I really appreciate you guys coming in and sharing your experience today. I want to open it up for questions officially. So if anybody in the community has a question they want to ask somebody specifically, we'll just we'll start fielding those one by one as they come in.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your questions, guys. Unmute your mics or just put up your hand or just blurt it out. If we haven't answered anything about the pros and cons, which way should you go? Then just let us know here.
In immersion, would you prefer no paste, just heat sink, or paste?
You have to have the paste. It needs a transfer from the chip to the heatsink.
So you're gonna leave the heat sinks on then?
Yeah, absolutely. You gotta leave the heat sinks on. Gotta leave the thermal compound intact. But both WhatsMiner and Canaan and Aerodyne and everybody that's producing immersion miners these days are gonna use like a different bond other than thermal paste. So you won't really have to worry about that like moving forward, I don't think.
Who was it that tried that idiom foil? Like, I don't know, it's probably super expensive, but I've heard people were doing that. You, Rick?
Yeah, no, I mean that's very common in the HPC space. I think if you ordered a Dell server, Rick, correct me if I'm wrong, it's probably got indium foil on it these days. You'd know better than me, but yeah, it's very common.
Oh yeah, 2CSRI, a number of different companies. That when you get an actual immersion specific server, indium foil is between that radiator and the chip. The whole concept of even delidding, taking that TIM and removing it completely so that the fluid goes on the inside and everything else, don't do it. Don't do it. You're going to destroy your very expensive product right now. Reserve that for two-phase immersion cooling, and even there you have to be incredibly careful. But yeah, indium works really well. It's not the end-all be-all. Doing some delidding, putting some good paste between that GPU and that radiator goes a long way, especially if you start doing some third-party types of radiators that use heat pipes and thermal siphons and everything else. But yeah, indium works really well. Its WKS is incredibly high compared to the 400 of copper or 290 of aluminum.
Great. O has a question. Did you want to say something, O?
Yeah, I think I got through Brent, and Brent knows me. I've been linked for a while. I think George and Brent knows me. And my question was this is a imaginary situation where a beginner with really no experience into mining, he got a budget of, let's say, under $1,000. So how can this guy, this woman, this person, whatever, get into mining with very little capital?
Scott, you're muted.
Yeah.
Oh, so the question is, how do you get into mining with very little capital?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
Bitcoin. ASICs are expensive.
I would say, you know, from the perspective of somebody who's actually trying to get into Bitcoin mining with very little capital, the first thing to do is just get your feet wet. You know, go out and buy a machine just so that you can start understanding it. If you understand Bitcoin, you understand how the Bitcoin mining technology works, then, you know, start you know, playing around with small immersion systems. We have a gentleman on, I don't know if he's in this call today, but Ron is building some immersion builds in his backyard. So, you know, hash out your home, get as many miners as you can get a hold of, and slowly grow from there. I wouldn't recommend anybody who's just starting in the Bitcoin space to go out and invest all of their money in Bitcoin mining infrastructure. Definitely get your toes wet first before you do that.
He should also research mining pools as well, because his hash rate at that level of cap is going to be extremely low. So if you join a mining pool, you can kind of at least guarantee you're going to get some kind of return on your investment. But yeah, I would say just buy Bitcoin at this point.
It's a good point, Fred.
Yeah, it's all about scale, right? Like if you can't do it in a large enough scale where maybe you can get your power costs down, or if you're not buying your ASICs for you know, cheap enough, you know, at the dip, then it can potentially be unprofitable. So it's definitely a business decision. You have to look at all the numbers, all the different you know, factors of difficulty, and the fact that it usually gets harder to mine and less profitable to mine over time, and things break down, right? So yeah, doing it on a small scale, sometimes it could be more useful if you're doing it to recapture the heat. So like Trevor was heating his house with his miner, you know, or like if you have a cold basement,
Right there.
you know, yeah, there it is. Maybe if you have a cold basement or a spot in your house that could use a little bit more heat, you can introduce a miner. Instead of putting a space heater there, you can put a miner there, right? So there's ways to get into mining and to maybe reduce that overhead by reusing the heat. But usually Bitcoin mining is only profitable really when you're doing it in scale and when you can really lock in a really good power rate. But yeah, let's get back to immersion and hydro and air cooling and the pros and cons and differences. John Bonacore had his hand up first.
Yep. Hey, thanks, Scott. Yeah. Yeah, and another low barrier to entry really quickly is just go to a hosting facility, right? But the problem is not many hosting facilities have the solutions that the gentleman on this call had today. And I want to thank everybody, you know, for joining today too as well. But one of the questions was for Rick, if you can explain what a single system means in immersion, because that's I think like if you can elaborate on that, it'd be helpful for folks on the call today, what the single system is. And the other question I have for everybody is, do we see a big shift that over the next, you know, year to 2 years that this entire ecosystem of Bitcoin mining is shifting towards immersion and hydro? Because, you know, lots of clients are asking, that's what we're seeing, and that's what we're telling folks, like, it's just the scalability is off the charts, right? So if you don't participate, you're eventually going to be left behind.
Yeah, you're probably right on that one. I don't know anybody who has gone from air cooling to liquid cooling and then, you know, said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore, unless they had like some wannabe liquid cooling guy who said, hey, you know, I'm going to go from liquid cooling back to air cooling. You know, you just don't hear those stories. And so, you know, when you say a single solution, that's I want to call it open-ended, because we have you know, cool companies like Fog Hashing who have some really cool products that, you know, support 4 or 6 miners, and we have you know, the tank level where they support, you know, 28 to 30, and then we have, you know, things like Rosso where the smallest you can buy supports 320 M66s as an example. You know, point blank today, we don't really create a solution that pushes to you know, the home users and stuff like that. You know, I'm leaning a little bit, and I'm thinking about making a solution that fits the masses. You know, that might do a 4 or 6 node system that would make a lot of people happy on the planet, I think. But when you talk about a single solution, that's kind of open-ended. Maybe if you want to elaborate on what that might look like.
Yeah,
first
I
before-
said maybe I said it incorrectly without enough detail. Like the architecture of your system, right? It's not comprised of multiple skid pumps. Like the architecture, you know, if you could go over that, because I think that's what makes you all stand out a lot too in the space.
We do. We have a solution that, you know, has, as an example, 8 tanks that run on a single pump skid, and therefore allows us to swap out tanks. Swap you if you want to go from the ASIC configuration over to HPC or AI. It's a matter of, you know, changing out, you know, a single tank that you know, the investment change is, you know, a single digit percentage of what you would normally pay for the Rosso one. And so we have a solution that says, okay, we reuse, you know, 99.9% of everything that you purchased on the Rosso one moving forward. If some new miner and some Joe Blow guy makes this best ASIC in the world that says, I'm doing now 2 watt per terahash, but we have this crazy configuration and format and sizing that nothing fits anymore. You know, it's a matter of changing out this, you know, the cheapest part of the entire Rosso system, and you swap that out and you put it on, and your investment that you created at the very beginning is no longer lost. And so, you know, we created this modular type of solution on purpose. It wasn't by accident, and you know, the serviceability and the manageability and everything that goes with it, it's did on purpose. And then, you know, getting my teeth cut for years before going to TMG and working with Taylor and all the stuff that me and Taylor actually uncovered. The stuff that me and Taylor done, you know, I'm not going to go into detail, but we did some pretty cool shit together. And you know, we think that there's a lot of room to grow. But you know, the Rosso one is probably going to be one of the first systems that's out there that really conforms to modularity and allows you to expand and contract as needed and change and move with the times. But you know, I don't know if I answered your question or not. But you know, from a personal standpoint,
you absolutely did, and I think that's what is important. Sorry for incorrectly phrasing it at first, but everything you share, Rick, is educational, so I appreciate it. Thank you as always.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I was going to say, let's get to Jacob.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, so first off, on the small immersion mining scale, I can't think of the name of the guy's company, but there's a guy, Dane O, that has this hash rate house. I feel like
I'm going to have him on the podcast. Sorry, yeah, Dane O's pretty cool guy. I've been talking with him.
Yeah, I had some chats with him, and so I mean, he's got a 2 miner system. I think there's some other systems out there that are pretty small that just didn't exist a few years ago, because I was looking at, you know, maybe like 6 miners or something for home mining, and it just literally didn't exist. I was looking at importing with air freight or something from Europe, and it was a mess. But my question, though, I guess, is on the temperature changes. So I thought that was a really interesting point about the value of immersion mining in just temperature stability, even if it's a higher temperature or things like this, and then curtailment. So, you know, if you go into curtailment and you're able to put them into low power mode or, you know, something like that versus the air cooling, just in terms of how damaging that is, right? So I guess with air cooling, if you get a curtailment request and, you know, you need to shut everything down, do you flip the breaker? You know, do you put them into low power mode? What do you do? And I've heard, you know, a lot of people, they'll just basically flip the breaker because they're trying to get down to as low of a power level as they can. But ultimately, does that end up damaging your reliability? Does that damage your return on investment because you end up having hardware failures and things like this? Maybe that is a strong argument for immersion, because you can flip the breaker on immersion and theoretically your temperature should stay the same, right? So I'm just curious about curtailment strategies with air versus hydro and what you've noticed on, you know, temperature fluctuations or hardware failures. I thought that was really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, I mean, so we do operate a ton of air. Like I said, we built 230 megs of air this past year. We definitely go with the sleep mode effect. When we go to curtail in air, you are completely correct in the idea, like for me as an operator, my number one goal is keeping the device online, right? Every time that we kill power to it is another chance for the power supply to break, or an added chance of the component failing due to the inrush and everything of the electricity, right? So you're 1,000% spot on there. You want to keep the device online at all times. The sleep mode allows everything to the network to stay online. But the biggest thing for me, honestly, is operator safety, right? We operate over 500 megawatts. I'm not going to send people to be slamming breakers multiple times a day. Every time we slam those breakers, we open and close them. It's another chance for failure, another chance for an arc flash, another chance for generally something to happen, right? So not only is the sleep mode way better on the machines, it's also much safer on all of my operators out in the field, making sure that they don't have to get anywhere near an electrical panel or have to deal with any of the things that could come on complications. And again, at the larger level, right, when you're slamming those breakers, you're causing effects on the switchgear, you're causing effects on your transformers, all those types of things. If you slowly bring the miners down into sleep mode, you slowly bring the voltage and everything stays contained, and then you slowly bring it back up, much more stable on the machines. But to your point, it's better in immersion because we can slow the pumps down, keep the heat in, keep all the chips the same. But yeah, keeping the electricity on is paramount.
Thanks, I appreciate it. That's really interesting. Especially the safety aspect. I didn't think about that one, but that's obviously critical. Thank you.
Yeah, safety is definitely our number one concern at CleanSpark over performance, uptime, anything like that. It's always making sure everybody goes home with the same amount of fingers they came with.
Nice. I've got a question for Kevin. So just from a standpoint of scale, like what's the smallest number of miners you can really do? Like, and is this possible to do at home, right? Like, because I think a nice advantage for the immersion people is that it seems fairly easy for them just to put a couple of these things in their basement and maybe hook it up to their hot water heater or their outdoor pool or whatever, right? But for hydro, I've seen some smaller systems. But yeah, what do you think? All right, Kevin, what do you think about the scale and the feasibility of that?
You're muted, Kevin.
Sorry. So I think the hydro, like for the home user, a couple of things. The hydros, the power supply is a 415 power supply. So that'll be one of your biggest concerns, really. Most homes can't do the 480 or 415. So I think that'll probably be your biggest issue to tackle at your home. Secondly, I would say that there are these, and I'm interested in one of my biggest opportunities, I think, is going to be in the heat reuse and maybe the minor, say a minor home heater kind of deal that might have 4 or 6 miners going on. So a function of that will be how much are you, whether or not that makes sense will be whether or not you have other heating expenses that go away, right? If you're already on these space heaters or this or that, you can definitely make a system work. But I think your power supply is going to be a problem for at least the hydros, unless someone knows of a workaround that I haven't found.
Okay, so yeah, we'll open it up to Festus. I don't know if he wants to ask his question with his voice or just through the text. But yeah, first though, Kevin, a question for you: Would you do things differently? Now knowing what you know about hydro, and then also learning more about immersion today on this call, is immersion something interesting to you, or are you like 100% sold on hydro still?
No, actually, I mean, I actually was going to start. I have 2 immersion setups here at our facility that I was planning on doing to kind of run a parallel track where I was going to run a hydro container and then run a couple of tubs of immersion and kind of make that decision. So, I mean, it's been really encouraging actually to hear some of the things that Taylor has been talking about, their successes. And so I guess I don't have a closed mind to it, and it sure does lend itself to being, and if you're in the right place, the immersion can be inside, and there's a lot of good things about that. I would do a lot of things differently from a hydro perspective. I think the easiest simplification would be if I could run a dry cooler setup here versus the wet cooler, wet cooling tower. I would probably simplify things and probably a little more cheaply to deploy.
Sure.
Those weren't available when I made that decision. But if I was sitting here today with a green field in front of me, I'd be using dry coolers, but I would probably still do hydro.
Good to know. Yeah,
Kevin, now in your defense, when you made that decision, the watt per terahash was not all that stable at the higher temperatures. And
Right.
So, using evaporative cooling to hit that dew point, hitting that lower temperature for being able to bring that fluid in at a lower temperature was really imperative to increase your efficiency and your profitability. So I want to make sure everybody understands that today's miners are a little bit different, but Kevin made that decision based on what he had at that time. And it was the right decision at the time.
Yeah, true.
Thank you for that vote of confidence. We still live to tell about it, so that's a good thing.
Yeah, Festus, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question. Otherwise, I'll read it here. He says for Taylor.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Taylor. Go ahead, Festus.
Okay, Scott, thanks for this, and I've been following your channels, and it has really been helpful. I have a quick question for Taylor regarding immersion mining. Currently, I'm actually mining here in Nigeria, so I'm from Africa, and I'm looking at immersion mining, and sometimes talking to people about dry coolers, they don't know what they call dry coolers. What they have here is they call it air-cooled condensers. So I don't know if it's the same thing as the dry coolers. Then we also don't have fluids like the engineering fluids or electrocools that you have as a dielectric fluids in the US. What we have here is the transformer oil. So will you advise that I can use the transformer oil for my immersion mining?
So on the second one, don't use transformer oil. It's rather aggressive on the miner in some cases. Like the transformer oils are not made for humans to be really interacting with. If you're in Africa, I believe that you can get immersion oil from ExxonMobil, I believe, actually has started to deploy and support some immersion sites in Africa. So that might be an option for you. And I don't believe an air-cooled condenser is the same thing. Actually, it might be the same thing as a dry cooler. I think there's some variation in them. But yeah, I think that's generally a dry cooler.
Okay.
But don't use the transformer oil. I would not recommend that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
All right, guys. Well, I think unless there's anybody who's got another question before we wrap this up, I want to make sure everybody's able to do that.
Mitch asks, what cost of electricity is a non-starter when evaluating sites post-halving? Or where is the approximate break even right now? Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I mean, there's calculators out there that you can look at and make your decisions for yourself. But yeah, it really depends on which miner model you're using, and then obviously it matters if you're using immersion or air or hydro, because there's different levels of efficiency as well. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if anyone has a specific website that actually compares. I've seen spreadsheets that have it goes from red to green in like a chart, and it shows if you were running an S9, here's the break even, and here's when you'd have to shut it off. Or if you're running an S21, your kilowatt hour cost would have to be X. Otherwise, it's not worth running, type thing. But does anybody have any resource for Mitch on that?
Hey, Scott, I'm out on the road still listening. I'm gonna call her Dina. I know that she has one because she sent it to me, and it lists a couple, like dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of miners, and what point you have to turn them off. And I'll get her to send it to you, and then maybe you can forward it to him.
Great, yeah.
After something. I'll give you a shout after I'm off the phone because I only have my phone right now on drive.
Excellent. Thank you,
Okay,
Frederick.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've heard of a guy named Nico Smith, but I can pass his info to you, Scott. But he seems to put together some really good analyses.
Oh yeah, I'm subscribed to his newsletter on Substack or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, he's got his own website now and puts together a few reports and guides and things like this. And I find from an economics standpoint, if anyone's looking for economic analysis, I would throw that out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, it looks like Taylor needs to jump off, and I really appreciate all of our guest speakers today. Thank you. And yeah, but anyway, we'll just wrap it up here quickly. And I want to share my screen, and I want to tell you guys a little bit more about our MasterMIND Club. So right here is our MasterMIND Club. And if you go to our website, it is actually just mastermind.club. And that's MINED, not mind, it's mind. And if you liked what you saw today, we have more of that on a monthly and weekly basis. So as we were saying at the beginning of the call, what this includes, $100 a month. It's this technical topic deep dive webinar that you're on today, which is to the public. But the private things that the community gets is a weekly call where we go one-on-one and we just ask you, hey, how are you doing? What can we help you with? What hurdles are you experiencing? And then we just really get into the nitty-gritty of what steps do you need to take next in order to complete your Bitcoin mining project. And then also it comes with some consulting time from some of our team members. So one-on-one, you can have a phone call or you can call them up anytime and get our advice there specifically for your project, just privately. And then it also comes with some roadmaps and some spreadsheets and models and different blueprints and things that might give you a leg up on your project. So when you join the club, you get a lot of different value like that as well. On our website, you'll notice that there's for club members only, we have deals where, hey, we'll give you access to our lots of miners. So like usually we're saying you have to buy a minimum of 10 miners, right? But if you're a club member, we'll say, hey, just for you, we'll do it onesies and twosies. So if you want to buy one or two miners and you're just starting out, you'll have access to buy cheap miners in very small quantities if you're a club member. Otherwise, it's like 10 miners, 20 miners usually is the minimum. But yeah, so Trevor, I'll let you take it from here and close it down.
Absolutely. And I just want to say on that, Scott, the MasterMIND Club has been one of my favorite things about joining the team. And I know that I work for the team, but getting to talk with all the different people building in the space. I spent 2 hours on the phone last night with one of our members just talking about his project. And it was really incredible to just brainstorm and see what he's doing in the space. So if anybody's interested in that, please definitely hit up that website, try it out for a month. And if you don't like it, you can always cancel. But thank you guys so much for being here today. I hope you guys learned stuff. I hope you guys found it valuable. We are going to be doing this every single month. On the second Friday of every month, we will have a different topic that we want to cover, deep dive, go into it. Next month, we're actually going to be talking about setting up a hosting site, or basically whether you're hosting from your backyard or you're hosting from a warehouse or a container. We're going to talk about hosting, and so if you're interested in that, definitely stay tuned or join the MasterMIND Club and we'll talk about it. But other than that, like I said, Kevin, Rick, Chet, everybody who showed up today, Taylor, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for the value that you've added to our community, and we will see you guys next time.
Let's go.